In the next set of lecture videos, I'm going to be talking about the news media. And as you'll see, I'm going to rely a great deal on the things that you learned in the public opinion lecture videos. And in particular, we're going to be talking about the memory-based information processing model. And the reason I'm going to be doing that is because I'm going to make an argument about the impact that the media has on citizens that is probably contrary to what you believe, or certainly a lot of people who are watching this video believe. What do I mean? That most people attribute to the media a tremendous amount of power. They believe that the media can shape what people think. And what I'm going to suggest to you that that's not the case. In fact, using the memory-based model, I'm going to develop a line of reasoning that sort of identifies who can and who can't be affected by the media. And for those of you who are thinking about the memory-based model, you might be tapping into who those people are. So I'll give you a little preview. I'm going to argue that people who are univalent are not likely to be influenced by the media. Only people who are ambivalent are susceptible to the media. And I'll develop that argument. So you may be skeptical right now, but I hope that what you'll avoid doing is counter-arguing ahead of time. Just take in the information as much as you can and listen to what I have to say, because it's mostly based on political science research. In fact, some of the research that I did myself. And so with that, let's get started. So what I'm going to first do is describe the learning objectives for this set of lecture videos. And then I want to talk about this phrase, the media. So after this lecture, you'll be able to describe the hypodermic needle theory. You'll also be able to describe the minimal effects theory, as well as the subtle effects theory. Each of these is a different sort of theoretical approach that developed over time among political scientists and communication studies scholars. You'll also be able to describe the agenda setting effect and assess whether the agenda setting effect has a positive or negative impact on citizens' ability to carry out their democratic function, to determine who our leaders ought to be, to determine to whom they should entrust their political authority. And then you'll be able to explain how the agenda setting effect works using the memory-based information processing model. You'll also be able to describe priming effects, and you'll be able to explain how priming effects work using the memory-based information processing model. Also, in terms of some of the subtle effects that we'll be talking about, you'll be able to describe framing effects and how they affect citizens' understanding of events. The final thing that we'll be talking about is partisan bias in the news. The idea of partisan bias has to do with the notion that people argue that the media favors one political party over the other. Some people claim the media has a liberal bias, meaning that they favor the Democratic Party. Other people say that the media has a conservative bias, and therefore they favor the Republican Party. What I'm going to suggest to you is that a lot of the perceptions of bias actually don't come from the media. That a lot of the bias that people see in the media is their own bias being reflected back at them. Now, I'm not suggesting to you there isn't partisan bias in the media. There definitely is. Clearly there is. What I'm talking about is the idea that some of the bias that people see is really their own bias. And I'll explain that by describing an experiment that yielded the hostile media phenomenon, and we'll talk about the factors that cause it. And then you'll be able to identify the findings and implications of a study that I did with Matthew Baum called In the Eye of the Beholder, in which we show that people see bias when they expect to see bias, even when it's not there. But first, what I want to do is I want to touch on this notion of the media so I don't have to keep doing air quotes. So let me show you what I'm talking about. Now, when people talk about the media, I'll stop doing the air quotes. When people talk about the media, it's really interesting because they don't usually mean what I'm about to talk about. What I'm about to do is talk about who the media actually is, right? As a political scientist, if I'm going to study the media, I don't have the luxury of just using this vague definition of the media. I'll stop with the air quotes. I have to define what I mean. And if you think about it, if you're somebody who believes the media has a liberal bias or the media has a conservative bias, before I even start this, I want you to ask yourself, who do you mean? Who are you referring to? Because I want to show you who the media actually is. First, the media includes national newspapers. Now, these are newspapers that are either widely read nationally, like the Washington Post, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal. These are all really well-known papers. So they don't have a national circulation in terms of the physical paper themselves, but since all major news papers have an online presence, the national newspapers are also available to everybody. And then there are local newspapers. Now, you've probably never thought about this, but there are local newspapers all the way across the country, right? There are small towns that have little tiny papers that service them. They cover mostly just local news, and so you probably have never even seen some of them. If you look at the names that are popping up, the Decatur Daily, right, the Demopolis Times, like these are ones I just found looking up local newspapers. But most cities, big or small, have a newspaper, and in some cases, a big city might have multiple papers. In Los Angeles, we have the Los Angeles Times, we have the Daily News, but we also have Spanish papers. So La Opinion is also a paper. But small towns like Santa Clarita, we have our own newspapers as well. So in Santa Clarita, we have, wait for it at the bottom, the Santa Clarita Signal. We have the Signal. This is all the media. Everything you see on the screen is the media, but what I'm showing right now, or I should say what I'm showing right now, those are just newspapers. But there's also the network news programs. Now, when I refer to network news, I'm referring to the programs that are on ABC, NBC, and CBS, and it can be the nightly news broadcasts, or it can be the Sunday morning programs that are also on, like Face the Nation or Meet the Press. Now, for some of you who are really astute observers, one of the things you'll notice is that some of these programs have been canceled since I made this slide, but they've just been replaced by other news programs. Then there's also soft news. Now again, this is all the media. The media. Soft news programs, these are programs that people watch where they're going ahead to these particular news programs, not just for news, they're going there for entertainment. But in the process, they wind up getting news. They get exposed to news. So whether you're talking about the late night with David Letterman, or if you're talking about Saturday Night Live, these are all programs where you get what's called soft news. But we're not done with the media. There's local TV news. Now, for the purposes of this slide, all I included on this slide were local TV stations in the Los Angeles area alone. They would also qualify as the media as well. And as you can see, there's a whole bunch of local TV programs that are part of the media. Well, then I know it's kind of hard to see, but then there's the news and talk radio. Now, for the purposes of this slide, I limited the number of outlets. They're harder to see popping up because I was running out of colors, but excuse me. This is California alone. Just imagine if I'd included local news talk radio programs from New York and Texas and Michigan all over. But again, this is all the media. This is all the media because they're part of them. Local news, talk radio, these are all Then there's cable news, which I hadn't even mentioned thus far. So we're talking about the individual programs that are on Fox, that are on MSNBC, that are on CNN, that are on MSNBC, and other programs like that. And again, some of these, like Hardball, have been canceled, but they were just replaced by other programs as well. So the population would be just as cluttered whether or not those programs themselves existed. So we're talking about soft news. We've talked about local TV news. This is the media. But I want you to keep in mind that this is just a small sample. I didn't include all the national newspapers, all the local newspapers, all the local TV news or talk radio, all the soft news programs, every cable news program, every network news program. And you know what else I didn't include? I didn't even include internet sources on here. Like, so Breitbart isn't on here. The Daily Kos isn't on here. All these news outlets that people frequent regularly aren't on here. And think tanks, which frequently provide information, which could technically be called the media as well, they're not in here either. If I included every news outlet that I could find, and this is just the United States, right? This thing would be so cluttered up. This would all be so cluttered up, you wouldn't be able to see anything. So this is what I want you to remember. The next time you hear somebody talk about the media, they say the media has a liberal bias or the media has a conservative bias. Ask them a question that you would ask a political scientist. Who do you mean by the media? Right? Because what you'll find, and this may even be true of you, is that when they say the media, they're not referring to this group. They're not referring to all these people. They're usually referring to one or two or three outlets, and they've determined that that smattering that they've identified represents all of the media. I think it's probably hard to say that if you look at the diversity of the media, that there's anything that is common to all of these news outlets, except for one thing. If there's one driving factor, one thing that characterizes all these media outlets, they're all interested in making money. They all want the largest audience that they can get, because the larger the audience they can get, the more they can sell advertising. That's the thing that connects all of these media outlets. But the idea that there's a partisan bias of this entire group, I think that that's suspicious, and you should be suspicious about that. But we'll get into that more a little bit later.